grassroots to convince yourself that your theology as someone who takes the science.
Sorry, but my organization promotes social science data.
You pick and choose things that support your false beliefs that are proven disproven from many other sources, and false science that are put forward by people who engage in false science for the purpose of trying to reinforce your theology. And you will not pay attention to anything that you say about
I'm
how much
actually
your
here trying to get testimony to show
to use against
us. No, I actually would like to. I'd like to find people. I've been asking questions.
And you are perpetuating the idea that gay and lesbian people and transgender people are broken and therefore must be fixed. That kind of attitude is damaging their psyche. It leads them into self-loathing. It leads to suicide. You are damaging the lives of so many people, and by doing so, you are continuing to perpetuate the myth that we do not deserve an equal place in society. You are denying the rich variance of human nature. And there's so many people here, and there are people across our entire community who just want to live lives of happiness. We just want to want to be accepted for what we are, and have equal rights in our world. But you and your behaviors and your practices and the kind of stuff that you preach is only damaging our hope to have a future life. Fortunately, we're crawling out of the path that you want to cling to, and we're moving on to a better future.
I can feel your pain. Your pain's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's from our entire community.
I think that you've kind of distorted my view and what I'm promoting and what I'm doing, right? I care a lot about people, whether they're gay, whether they want to overcome their same-sex attraction, whether they want to embrace their same-sex attraction. I care about all humanity. However, I think there's a serious problem in that there are some people who have unwanted same-sex attraction. And I have, let me finish, I'll listen respectfully to you. I've interviewed them, I know them, and they've been able to get a lot of help because for them it was unwanted, right? For some people,
that doesn't mean they can change it.
Why did they not want it? That's the problem.
Would you do me a favor? Would you just do me one favor? Because just so you, I know that you're really upset with me because of what I do, but I want to tell you that I honestly do what I do because I care.
Actually, I honestly think that you do, but I also think that you are incredibly misguided. You're listening to the lies and distortions of your Mormon faith.
I accept that you believe that, right? And I understand why you would believe that. But I'd ask you to just do one thing. Just one thing.
What is that?
If you would watch the documentary that I already created.
I'm aware of it.
Okay? It's called Understanding Same-Sex Attraction. And if you will look at the testimonies of some of the people that were helped, I'm not saying everybody has to be helped. I'm not saying everybody wants to be helped.
And we're saying nobody
but
is
for
helped.
some people, I know you're saying that, but I just want you to listen for just one moment. I want you to look at their testimonies of how, for them, this is not true for everyone, for them, their same-sex attraction was creating problems.
Okay.
Right?
Well, let me ask you
they
this
were
then.
able to get help that changed that for them, where their lives are better.
Let me ask you this
That's
then.
not the path that everyone has to
How
take.
about the individuals that have done that, thought that that was the path that they wanted to go on, and through many years after the fact, had to deal with the torment of realizing they were just kidding themselves. And then they dealt with self-loathing, they dealt with hatred, they dealt with having to try to get their life back in order. If you care about people, how can you be a part of anything where adults force their children to do something without their opinion, without their consent, before you even know if it's something that they don't want, and it's not something they were just brainwashed to think or believe?
Thank you. Those are both very good questions. I'll start with the last one. I absolutely believe that no parent should ever force their child to have change therapy. I think that's wrong. I think it's abusive, and it would never help the child. So I think we see eye to eye on that.
Okay. Gay conversion therapy is something that these groups are having children being forced to do.
Okay, I just interviewed several therapists, and I asked them that question specifically because I'm with you on it. And I asked them, what do they do if a parent brings them into the therapy, the child unwilling, who wants nothing to do with it, who wants to gay identify, and what do you do? The therapist I've just interviewed said they would never treat them. They would tell the parents, this is not going to work, this is not helpful. The patient has a right to self-determination. And that's what I promote.
They
whether it be you want to continue to be gay, whether it be that you want to get rid of this, whether you want
don't have the choice. You are.
I know
There's
that
no
is
proof that shows that what you do works.
I know that that's I don't do therapy, right? Okay.
And that's
so
the
first of all,
problem. You are.
I'm not a therapist. However, I have interviewed multiple people who have gone through therapy. For some, and I want to go back to your first question because I care about those people too. For some, it doesn't work. For some, they feel worse because they've tried and it didn't work. It's very similar to therapy for a lot of different things. Therapy is not 100%. And in this case, it's a very difficult thing to change through therapy as well. It's hard work. It can take a lot of time. A lot of people don't succeed.
There's a reason for them to do
and
that.
I feel, I do feel compassion for those situations.
Can I ask you a question? Do you have female loved ones like daughters and nieces and cousins and whatnot and sisters? Would you honestly feel comfortable with someone that's been through gay conversion therapy, dating, marrying them, and the possibility of the roller coaster life that they could put people through?
Well, let's go back to your first question. I have a nephew who is
Okay.
transgender. I have friends. I have
Female to
a
male?
friend who's a male.
So that would be a she, right?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. So it would be a niece, not a nephew.
Well, it's not like I'm doing what I do with that. I care about them. Whether they choose to identify as gay, live that lifestyle, or whatever. I care about that. Second of all, I'm trying to get back to actually answer your question. You said, would I feel comfortable marrying someone who
Or
wants
have one of your loved ones?
therapy? I would think about the same with anything that somebody had gone through therapy with. I don't think that therapy for same-sex attraction is like a special category outside of anything that somebody's going through category. Therapy going to change. There's always a risk if someone has experienced something they needed therapy to change, that they could go back, right? Because if you have alcohol, you have any kind of thing that you're trying to.
Worse yet, they can go back in a quiet, secretive manner because it pushes them in the closet
And
again.
it could.
And
I
then
agree that could happen.
they're living this happy life with a woman who thinks that they have.
That
happy
happens
ever after.
And
overwhelmingly most of the time.
Yeah, I know that does happen, but let me just bring you a real situation, kind of correlated, but you might not see it that way. Okay, there are a lot of people who deal with pornography, right? And I would prefer that my children never marry someone who has pornography addiction.
So you're comparing being gay to pornography?
No, I'm saying that for some
Sexual
people,
orientation is.
they can be addicted, just like some heterosexual people can have sexual addictions heterosexually. There are some people who can have sexual addictions that are related to their
And that is
same-sex feelings.
irrelevant matter.
Okay,
Gay is no
so-
more sexual than is straight.
Yeah, I disagree
What?
with
I
that.
there's dysfunctional sexually for gay people and heterosexual.
I can tell you this.
What they
I can tell you this.
But to conflate sexual orientation and sexual orientation is just as
You missed. Okay, well look, you're kind of changing my argument to something unpleasant in my analogy. I'm saying when someone has an addiction like pornography or any kind of sexual addiction, whether it be heterosexual or homosexual, I'm not putting homosexual in a different category than heterosexual addiction. Would you not agree with me or give me that it's possible, since there are heterosexual sexual addictions, that there's also homosexual sexual addiction?
It is a changing of the subject. I will give you the point on that if that were the topic, but it's not the topic.
I actually, as a therapist myself, I'm going to have to disagree with the assertion that there's a difference between, that there is specifically a heterosexual sexual addiction. You're going to have to come up with some sort of material to identify that point.
Okay, well, let's just say
There's
somebody
sexual
has a
addictions that have
sexual
nothing to do with
addiction,
orientation.
and they are oriented towards, they're male and they're oriented towards females. I would call that a heterosexual sexual addiction. And let's say you
Okay,
have,
but that's not what it is. That's what you would call it. That's a significant difference.
Don't care if it's male, female, or otherwise.
right, but some are oriented one way or the other.
And they can, but I'm not gonna say that. And actually, the APAs are not going to agree with the fact that that would be something you would call sexually oriented towards heterosexual or homosexual. That wouldn't be the case.
Well, actually, they're talking about they're talking about all sorts of sexual addictions. They aren't just
But
focusing on.
but if they're segregating, but if they're segregating them into heterosexual and homosexual, they're already making an error. They're making a significantly biased decision base that actually is going to have a long-term effect on the underlying basis of their diagnoses.
Well, I would agree with you that a sexual addiction is a sexual addiction, regardless of whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. Where I would differ with you is I would say that if it's one or the other, you might, in therapy, try to treat it a little bit differently, and the origins could be a little bit differently. They could be. You could also treat it the same and maybe have good results
But
because
you're talking about
in the end, it's a sexual addiction.
You're talking about a physical thing as opposed to an emotional thing, ignorance of. Me and my partner, we don't watch anything.
Seriously, in discussing this
I'm
protest here,
not insinuating.
in discussing this protest here, I've actually mentioned several times that when the topic of discussion we're going to have here is sexual addiction, and we can't really take any issue with the fact that that the sexual addiction, because that isn't the problem. That is not why we're standing out here on the street. And again, I have to state, to conflate the subject of sexual addiction with the issue of the lives of gay, lesbian, transgender people and the subject of comparative therapy is simply throwing up a smoke screen and creating a straw man that you can attack.
Well, I don't think so because
There's
are
no
you
relationship
protesting?
between the two.
There is no relationship between who you're sexually oriented or if you're sexually oriented.
The
and
topic
have
of
some type
sexual addiction has no relationship to the
Not to,
topic of sexual addiction.
not to mention the people of these LGBT groups, you're giving their families false hope. You're giving them a ticket to commit bigotry, to down the LGBT youth, to, if it isn't working, to tell them work harder because it can happen. And some of those people who aren't educated, okay, who aren't civil, who aren't tactful, can take it a step further into abuse, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and verbally. They can go out there, they teach their other children who are not LGBT, and those children go out there and start bullying LGBT people. I had a friend of mine who was killed by a boot to a temple by 6 people who were taught by people like yourself who believe that homosexuality is wrong.
First of all, to me it was very offensive for you to equate me with anybody who would abuse somebody because of their
But there are
sexual
people that are
orientation.
taught
I
by people
believe
like
that, no, I would never. Everything that I write is I condemn violence or harassment. I condemn bullying against people.
violence?
Absolutely.
Do you condemn violence done against another person by one person? I'm going to ask this flat out. Do you condemn that?
Of course.
Okay.
Unless
Are you
it's
familiar?
like in-
No one lesses.
A war or when
Even then,
defense or-
I'm going to tell you to condemn that because most of us will agree here. My question, though, is: are you familiar with the studies that demonstrate that a simple act of saying, such as you just did, that my nephew, when your nephew is your niece, is this? That simple act has an impact on a person's life and can be shown using science to have an impact within the brain that reacts exactly the same way as it did if you were to hit them physically. Were you aware of that science?
I'm aware that words could cause
This-
many people to feel like they were hit physically.
But what I'm saying is the science demonstrates that what you already did specifically causes that specific kind of harm. That idea, that denial of that person's basic core dignity and truth is what is causing harm to people. That's what this therapy ultimately does.
Okay, I hope you'll hear me out here because I understand where you're coming from and I understand why you're saying that, but we have completely different worldviews. That doesn't mean that I don't care. It just means that we have completely...
True, and I'm not
Well,
discussing
so
a
let me
worldview. I'm
just give
discussing
you-
a scientific fact.
Right, so let me
I mean,
give you the scientific fact on the other side. Okay?
There is no fact on the other side or one
Are
side.
you
It's
saying I
the same
can't have
fact.
I can't have a fact?
I'm going to tell you that it better be a fact as opposed to an opinion, because what I'm telling you isn't an opinion. It's
Right,
fact.
I want to give you a fact. Okay.
Okay.
The first surgical sexual reassignment center at the Johns Hopkins University. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I think the director of it was Paul McHugh.
That was the third director of it, yes.
Okay. Well, I have a quote from him of why they shut it down. Okay.
You mean aside from the one that he gave before he was actually brought in, where he said the purpose of my going there is to shut it down?
Yes. Aside from that.
Okay, just want to be sure.
Okay. What they found was
Mm-hmm.
is that most of the patients who had this surgery, they were very happy that they had the surgery. They were very pleased with their surgery. I don't have his exact words. But what they found is all the problems that they had didn't go away because of the surgery. And they continued to want more and more surgeries. And it wasn't, wait, let me just finish and then you can have your say. Okay? Because it didn't solve the problem that they were hoping to solve through surgery. And Paul McHugh said something to the effect that we've been trying to change the body to match what's in the brain when what we really need to be doing is change what's in the brain to match the body. And so I was debating a policy, which I'm sure you would be upset of which side I was on, at the Maricopa County colleges, and people were really angry with me.
We were there.
Oh, okay, you were angry with me.
You're talking about the body, and we're talking.
Well,
let me just finish
no, let her
with
finish,
one
because
thought.
I
One
actually
thought.
do have a response specifically
Okay,
to that.
One thought. And again, I said the reason why I'm here is because I care. We may disagree with what's the best way to help people get happiness in different situations, but I really do care, and I really believe. I cited the Johns Hopkins University and that
Which was an opinion, not a fact, but that's understandable.
Well, it's a fact that they shut it down, and it's
It is a fact that they shut it down.
The director
That didn't
said
end it. It's
that
gone
this
on,
was the
grown for years
reason,
and years
and that's
since
what
then.
happened.
Okay, now
Nothing to do
I'm
with
going to
it.
address.
Well,
Let her finish, and then I want to address that reason.
So, I said, I will probably say something that nobody will say here, and you may disagree with it, but you can't attack my motive because I'm saying it because I care, and that is that it wouldn't matter how many hormones you could take or how many surgeries you could have. You cannot change your biological sex. It will not change. And if you continue down that route, it can lead to unhappiness. And I've known of many suicides related to that. The unhappiness that have come because they haven't ever been able to obtain the goal of becoming the opposite sex. So
Okay,
there's two sides to this.
I want to
about
address one point that you raised.
Yeah,
I want to address the point that you raised earlier regarding Paul McHugh. At the time that Paul McHugh did that, the standard understanding of trans people's lives at the experience based on what they had were all built around the fundamental work of John Money. I'm sure you're familiar with John Money in your studies, okay? You do recall that the work that John Money did to establish that particular concept of gender identity being taught was completely undermined, and that when he was revealed to have basically lied for decades on that process. You were aware of that, right? That was 10 years ago? And that
you're giving me more credit for all of. I have a friend that studied him, and I really haven't really studied.
So
him.
basically,
I'll-
the
I'll-
ideas that
I'll
Paul
try to-
McHugh
I'll
was
listen
operating
to you.
under when he did that were based on falsified information, intentionally falsified to protect a reputation. To be perfectly blunt. Since that time, we have understood, and while that was all going on, there was an entire track of study that was discovering that isn't the case. And in the last decade, almost exactly now at this point, we've completely discovered that the exact opposite is true. And on top of that, McHugh made the decision for himself, not based on facts. The study you're citing comes from two different authors who he hired to write it a specific way, and who he admits hiring to write it that specific way. And what they basically discovered was that this is what we want to do. They didn't do any fundamental research into the actual impact of the surgery. And on top of it, this is also the 1970s. You're familiar with the time period here where even the the gay community was under attack at all times at that point, even then. So what you're dealing with is a totally different basis for understanding that is falsified at its core versus the actual truth. We've proven already that the surgery itself was never intended to fix all the other problems. It's intended to fix one problem, and that one problem is always fixed by that surgery.
You totally missed the point. You start saying, you cannot change the biological sex. That's not the point of what we're trying to do. And to make that comparison between the lives of all transgender people.
I find that interesting, but the goals of the people that I've talked to have said that they're trying to achieve what they believe is their true gender. They don't believe that their biological gender is their true gender. And so they're trying
Well, there is no such thing as a biological gender. Fundamentally, gender is a social structure. Fundamentally, you can't change a biological gender.
Fundamentally, we disagree, and that's okay. We can
that's
disagree.
We can disagree, except you're disagreeing with a fact versus disagreeing with reality.
Coming from a position of high
Yeah.
bias rooted in something totally unrelated.
That doesn't apply.
Well, I would say there are a lot of people in this world who would believe that you're born either male or female, unless you're the intersex, which is a very small percentage.
Whether or not they believe that is not the fact.
Which
You
is
can consider
false.
it. I'm sure there are a lot of things that you believe that I would never consider a fact, but you believe are facts, and this is one.
If I were to send you some material to read that points out to you in a very explicit, very scientific way that what you're arguing is actually a falsehood.
I would love you to send me all the stuff that you're talking about.
Okay,
I
well,
love to
it's
research
one great big thing. It's called An Introduction to Transness. It's about 68 pages.
I
You
would
up for
love
it?
to read.
Give me some contact information. We'll do
Could
it.
I get an agreement that you guys
Okay.
would watch the documentary on understanding
I
same-sex
actually have.
attraction and just listen to the testimonies? Are you trying to tell me those people are liars?
I'm trying to tell you that those people have been deceived.
They're misguided.
They're happy.
They're misguided.
They're part of my life.
Hun, are you happy? Are you happy?
Yes, I am.
And yet you've been deceived. There's things I've been deceived on, and I'm perfectly happy. Happiness does not have anything
But
to
they
do with
were
deception.
Unhappy. They were very unhappy and very afflicted before they were able to get help, before they were able to.
But is happiness
get this
is the
change.
goal of therapy to make somebody happy, or is it to make them healthy?
The goal is both. It's to make them happy and healthy.
One thing that we're missing here is what is making these people happy.
That's the cause.
Okay,
What's the
that's,
cause?
I'm really glad you asked that, because a lot of the presentations I've been listening into they're saying we don't treat same-sex attraction. We treat depression. We treat childhood trauma. We want to help people deal with a lot of difficult things. And I said, you know what's amazing? Is when we do that, a lot of times their same-sex attraction diminishes all by itself. It's not something we directly work to.
There's prejudice, there's harmful, it's the views of society, it's the way we're treated, it's discriminatory, it's the health disparities, it's all these things. This is why people are getting therapy, and I just want them to understand. Okay, because if they go in and they get therapy to be straight and now they're happy because that's what society wants them to do.
Okay, I really need to ask this question. Can society cause greater HIV/AIDS rates, greater hepatitis, greater all the? If you go to the gay and lesbian
Yes.
medical site, and it has all the different physical things that happen from, especially men having sex with men. I care about those people. I care about those outcomes. I don't think society can create those biological diseases that spread at much higher rates.
You're the one creating the circumstances of those kind of diseases.
But society does do that.
No, because gay people would not have that kind of lifestyle if they're allowed to
That-
marry and live normal lives in equality with everybody else.
Keep
I'm happy
one.
to dialogue. I like to dialogue.
I want you to keep one thing in mind.
You can email me at please don't send me lots of hate mail. I wouldn't do that.
No, no, no. We
It's
like when this gets posted. When this gets posted, we'll bleep it out for you.
mouth-
Yeah, and please don't portray me as something I'm not.
No, we just
Okay.
we generally just post them.
Exactly.
Well, as you see me, maybe.
And that's what you're going to have to
sometimes
put up, because
I
you
want-
portray us as something we're not.
I want you to remember something. There are groups all over this nation that have stood against the LGBT, whether they were thinking they were in the right, whether they were religiously based, whether they thought they were religiously based, like Westboro. And then there are people in those groups that are constantly leaving those groups, heads of those groups, heads of conversion therapy, that are saying, you know what? I don't know what I was thinking. They got some actual information. They actually took a little bit of time to absorb it. And they realized, you know what? I've done so much damage to
You
people.
people living that lifestyle, you people who have changed and are going back.
They didn't become gay. Those heads of those organizations didn't become gay. They didn't go back to being gay because they never did to begin with. But they realized how much harm they did to people, and all they could do was apologize. And they couldn't apologize enough in their words because.
I know some of the people.
So
that you're
please,
talking
do some
about.
research.
I know of the people. There's a wife of one of those people right here in this conference. I know that does happen.
Is she still his wife?
But I know way more people.
Is she still his wife?
No, he left.
That's
I
not the
think.
point.
I don't know.
Yeah,
That's not the point. I don't know.
guys.
But what I do know is that there are a lot of people who have left that and that they are very happy and they're not going back. So there's both. But there's way more I see of those who are glad that they got therapy. And I believe that they have a right to self-determination.
That you see in public, that you see at big venues like this, when you do conferences and stuff. You don't see their everyday lives when they get out of bed in the morning, before they go to bed, when they stare at the ceiling in anguish because they're running this through their heads. No, actually, nobody sees that except the person whose mind is behind those eyes.
Wait, that they're liars. They can never. They must be secretly unhappy. They must, no matter what.
They've proven it time and time again.
You're projecting onto them something that you believe. When they say different, you can't accept
Well,
what they
there's
say.
something projected onto them, a self-loathing rooted in faith, rooted in theology that says that they can't be that because they've been taught by family, by community, by religion, by church, by preachers that somehow there's something wrong with being what they are. And they so much want to be a part of the faith that they have grown up in that they'll latch on to anything to convince themselves of that. And
Nobody
they'll
wants
tell
to
people
be
around them to be a part of that
That
church
does not
community.
fit the people I know. Yeah.
When I hear testimony of those who are seeking to overcome their same-sex attraction, a lot of testimony talks about the fact that they did their coming out, they embrace the gay identity and the gay lifestyle for
Their lives,
couple of
their gay lives.
gay lives, and they did not find the fulfillment that they were hoping
They
to
found
find.
they didn't
So,
find
so
it
it's
at
not the parents that they convince them or the society. They tried it.
Well, it is
They
the
tried
society.
it for
That's the
many
point.
years. Didn't fit for them. They were not happy with that.
If they found the right person, if they found someone they could love and commit to, if they found a person they could build a life and a future with, that they would have been content with it. They probably caught up in the myth that he tries to portray, that being gay is going to bars and clubs and hopping from bed to bed to bed. But there may be people out there doing that. Wonderful people that I know in the gay community who marry and build lives together and have futures together and have love to one another. If he had taken the time to find that, if he had focused his sexual orientation or realization that that's what it could lead to, he could have found the content
Yes.
full life.
What do you make of those people who are married into a heterosexual life?
Because they've tried to
And
live
then
up to
you are
something they're not.
happy, and then they go to homosexuality. You welcome them, and you believe it's true. So why don't you agree that those who experimented homosexuality life
We welcome them.
Are not happy.
We welcome anybody as a part of
wants to go to
But
heterosexual?
we
Why
don't
don't you
give them a
welcome
special
them?
priority because they happen to be one time been in a marriage. As you know, many of people who have at one time been in a marriage and realizing that I've done what my community and my family has told me I'm supposed to do and has been wrong for me all along.
For many people, they thought they were born heterosexual, but at the age of 40, they become gay because they discover that it's their real identity.
Yes, feel sexual.
Why don't you believe that some people believe they were born gay, and at some point they realize that there's not their real
But
identity?
think about that age of 14 when hormones start kicking in, when you start feeling attraction toward other people, that you don't necessarily make a personal evaluation
And I
of choice
have
at
to
a
go.
rational level and say, I will find that person
I'm
attractive,
speaking
or
of
I will
14
find this
40 years.
person attractive.